It was one of those evenings where fashion met fame, where every step on the runway felt like history being written under the glow of elegance. Celebrities from around the globe had gathered in Paris for one of the year's most anticipated fashion events. And among them, two names were on everyone's lips: Georgina Rodríguez and Irina Shayk. And no one expected that a night designed for beauty and art would turn into a battlefield of pride, jealousy, and raw emotion. But that's exactly what happened. Georgina arrived first. The moment she stepped out of her black limousine, the crowd erupted. Cameras flashed like fireworks, fans screamed her name, and photographers nearly tripped over each other just to get a clear shot. Dressed in a dazzling red gown that hugged her figure like it was made for her and her alone, she walked with confidence. The kind of confidence that didn't come from fame or fortune, but from knowing who you are. She smiled, waved, and posed gracefully, exuding elegance with every gesture. To the world, she was the woman who had everything: beauty, class, and the love of one of the most famous men alive. But to Irina, watching from inside the venue, she was something else entirely. Irina Shayk had built her own empire long before Georgina had stepped into the spotlight. She was the original, the woman once by Ronaldo's side, the face of countless luxury campaigns, the name whispered with reverence in the fashion world. Yet tonight, as she prepared to walk the same runway where Georgina would later make her appearance, something inside her burned. A mix of pride, resentment, and something far deeper as the show began. Both women took their turns gracing the stage. The audience cheered wildly for both, but there was an undeniable tension. A quiet storm brewing just beneath the glamour. Cameras captured subtle glances, tight smiles, and moments that seemed innocent to most but carried hidden meanings for those who knew the history between them. Backstage, the air was thick with whispers. Stylists rushed, makeup artists touched up faces, and assistants carried dresses worth more than cars. Georgina stood near a mirror, checking her reflection one last time before her next segment. That's when she heard it. A voice, cold and cutting through the chatter like glass breaking. "So this is what Ronaldo settled for?" Irina said, her tone sharp, dripping with venom. "A fat, ugly gold digger pretending to be a model." The words hit like a slap. The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward them. For a moment, Georgina froze. Not out of fear, but shock. It wasn't the insult itself that hurt. It was the audacity. In a room full of people, under the same roof that celebrated elegance and respect, Irina had thrown a dagger straight at her. But Georgina didn't flinch. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and slowly turned around. The look in her eyes could silence a storm. Calm, composed, deadly. She took a few steps closer, heels clicking on the floor like thunder in the quiet. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but every word carried the weight of unshakable confidence. "Gold digger?" she said with a small smile. "You call me that, but let's not forget who built her career standing next to the same man I'm with now. The difference between us, Irina, is that when I stand next to him, I don't need to prove my worth. He already knows it." A few gasps echoed around the room. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Irina's face tightened. She wasn't expecting a reply, certainly not one this direct, this composed, this devastating. But Georgina wasn't done. She took another step forward, lowering her voice just enough so that everyone could hear. "You see, Irina, beauty fades, fame fades, but class never does. And that's something you can't buy, no matter how many designer contracts you sign." The room erupted. Stylists, models, and even photographers who had pretended not to listen couldn't help but clap. The sound of applause filled the backstage corridor, echoing off the walls. Georgina simply smiled, adjusted her hair, and walked away with her head held high. Irina stood frozen, humiliated. Her own words now a mirror reflecting back the bitterness she had tried to throw at someone else. Moments later, Georgina stepped back onto the runway, radiant and fearless. The crowd, unaware of what had just happened backstage, could sense something different about her walk. It was stronger, bolder. She glided down the runway with grace and power, owning every inch of the spotlight. And when she reached the end, she turned, her eyes locking on Irina, who was standing by the side curtain. That look said everything. It wasn't anger. It was victory. Quiet, confident victory. When the show ended, the applause was thunderous. Reporters rushed to the backstage area to capture post-show interviews, but all anyone could talk about was Georgina's poise, her confidence, Her glow. She was the star tonight, one fashion critic remarked. You could feel her energy. She owned the night. But for those who had witnessed the confrontation, they knew why that energy burned so brightly. Georgina hadn't just walked the runway. She had walked over her past. Over every whisper that tried to define her, every insult thrown her way, every person who had called her a gold digger instead of recognizing her as the woman she had become. Later that night, as the stars left the venue and the city lights reflected off the Seine, Georgina was spotted at the after-party. Still in her red gown, surrounded by friends and colleagues who couldn't stop praising her, she looked radiant. But when asked about the incident, because word had started spreading, she smiled and gave a reply that instantly went viral. I don't respond to hate, she said. I just let success answer for me. Those words became the headline the next morning. The internet exploded with praise. Fans flooded her social media with comments like, Queen energy, iconic, and that's how you handle an insult. Clips of her on the runway were shared millions of times, with captions celebrating her confidence and grace. Meanwhile, Irina's team tried to do damage control. They released a brief statement saying her words were taken out of context. But it was too late. The moment had already burned itself into the public's mind. People began comparing their reactions. Irina's bitterness against Georgina's class. And in that comparison, one truth became undeniable. Georgina didn't just win the argument. She won the world's respect. For Ronaldo, watching from afar, it was a moment of pride. Those who knew him said he smiled when he saw the clip, the way Georgina held herself, the way she spoke, the way she didn't let hate win. That's my woman, he reportedly said, and the days that followed. Magazines praised Georgina's dignity. Fashion outlets called her the embodiment of elegance under pressure. She received invitations to new campaigns, her brand value soared, and her fan base grew even stronger. Irina, on the other hand, remained quiet. Some said she regretted the words. Others believed she didn't. But what was clear was that, in that one evening, Georgina had reminded the world of something powerful. That true beauty isn't about perfection, it's about grace under fire. And for every woman watching, for every person who had ever been insulted, underestimated, or belittled, Georgina's response became a symbol, a reminder that silence isn't weakness and that confidence can turn even the ugliest words into a moment of triumph. Because when Irina called her a fat, ugly gold digger, Georgina didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply owned who she was, and that, in the end, is what made her shine brighter than anyone else on that runway. The applause that night wasn't just for her walk. It was for her strength, her class, her victory. And when the lights dimmed and the night faded away, one truth remained clear in everyone's mind. Georgina Rodríguez didn't just defend herself. She defined herself. But Georgina Rodríguez. The internet was on fire. Hashtags trended across every platform. Hashtag Team Georgina, hashtag Queen Energy, hashtag Runway Revenge. Overnight, millions of people who had only admired her for her beauty were now admiring her strength. Clips of her graceful comeback played on loop. Her calm expression, the poised tone in her voice, the tiny smirk before she turned away. Commentators analyzed her reaction like it was a chess move. She didn't just defend herself, one presenter said on a morning talk show. She redefined what class looks like. Ronaldo was in training when the first reports reached him. His phone buzzed between drills, his teammates whispering and showing each other the trending videos. When he finally opened one, he couldn't help but pause. Seeing Georgina on that runway, hearing her words, the pride that washed over him was unmistakable. To the cameras, he was the same composed professional, but his smile gave him away. Back at home that evening, Georgina returned from a full day of interviews and praise. The house felt different, lighter somehow. Ronaldo was waiting in the living room, phone in hand, replaying the video again. When she walked in, he didn't speak right away. He simply stood, crossed the room, and pulled her into a hug. You handled it perfectly, he whispered. The whole world saw who you really are. For a moment, she let herself relax. It wasn't about proving anything, she murmured. It was about not letting anyone reduce me again. While love and pride filled their home, the other side of the world was dealing with the fallout. Irina Shayk's team was in full crisis mode. Within hours of the show ending, luxury brands began calling, not to offer deals, but to ask for explanations. A clip of her insult had leaked, clear as day. You could hear every word. Her PR manager stared at the screen, head in hands. "This isn't just gossip, Irina," he said softly. "This looks bad for everyone." Irina sat still, her expression unreadable. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," she finally said. "I was angry. I lost control for a second." "That second," her manager replied, "might cost months of reputation." Fashion houses quietly began distancing themselves. Statements were issued, carefully worded phrases about respect and professionalism. Irina, once celebrated for her poise, now faced headlines filled with disappointment. Some fans defended her, calling it human emotion. Others weren't so forgiving. Yet behind the walls of her Manhattan apartment, she wasn't the cold villain the internet imagined. She was a woman facing the echo of her own words. Late that night, she scrolled through her social media feed, watching video after video of Georgina's response. There was power in that calm voice, in the way Georgina refused to match anger with anger. For the first time, Irina felt something she hadn't expected: respect. Across Europe, television panels were already turning the clash into a cultural moment. Psychologists were invited to talk about female rivalry. Journalists debated the pressure on women linked to famous men. "What we saw," said one commentator, "wasn't just a spat. It was the collision of two worlds, old fame versus new influence." Meanwhile, Georgina received a call from an unexpected number. It was the creative director of one of the brands at the show. "You reminded people what dignity looks like," he told her. "We'd love for you to front our next campaign." Her schedule filled overnight. But fame comes with weight. As much as the applause comforted her, Georgina couldn't escape the feeling that her life was once again being defined by comparison. In interviews, reporters kept asking, "Did you really mean those words to Irina? Will you ever forgive her?" She smiled each time, repeating her new mantra, "I wish everyone peace. I focus on my family and my work." Behind the smile, though, she knew it wasn't over. A part of her still replayed the moment backstage. The sting of that insult, the hush of the crowd, the decision to stay calm. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about strength. Ronaldo, protective as ever, tried to shield her from the noise. He told the children stories about kindness, reminding them that words could hurt, but composure could heal. "Your mother taught the world that yesterday," he said during dinner, making everyone laugh. And the days that followed, the story evolved. Editors wrote op-eds praising Georgina's modern grace. Social media filled with clips comparing her reaction to famous come-under-fire moments by other icons. Even those who once doubted her motives started to see her differently. Irina, meanwhile, decided to step back. She canceled appearances, took a private flight to Moscow to see her family, and let her team handle the chaos. Alone in her childhood home, she reflected on how fame had changed her, how competition and pressure had twisted her instincts. She picked up a notebook and wrote a short sentence on the first page. "Silence can hurt more than words, but sometimes it heals." Weeks passed, and the storm began to settle. Brands slowly re-engaged, fans found new stories to discuss, but the fashion world hadn't forgotten. Whenever someone mentioned grace under fire, Georgina's name surfaced. Whenever gossip columns whispered about losing control, Irina's moment of anger was cited as a warning. And yet, time has a strange way of softening even the sharpest edges. Months later, the two women found themselves at another international event, this time on opposite sides of the same red carpet. Cameras captured every second, waiting for drama. But none came. Georgina approached first, radiant as ever. Irina followed moments later. For a brief second, their eyes met. No words, no smiles, no hostility, just quiet acknowledgement. Maybe it was respect, maybe it was exhaustion, but it was enough. Later, backstage, an assistant swore she heard Irina murmur to her stylist, "She really did handle it well." The stylist nodded. She had to. Everyone was watching. And perhaps that's the truth of it. Everyone was watching, and what they saw wasn't a feud, it was growth. For Georgina, the moment that began as an insult ended as empowerment. For Irina, it was a hard lesson about pride and restraint. And for Ronaldo, it was a reminder that the strength he admired most wasn't in the stadium lights. It was standing beside him, graceful even in the storm. Because sometimes, the loudest victory doesn't come from shouting back. It comes from walking forward, unshaken, while the world decides whose applause it will remember. And as the cameras dimmed and the noise of the world slowly faded, One truth remained: I in a place where fame can twist even the smallest words into storms. Georgina Rodríguez proved that elegance isn't about silence. It's about strength. She showed that when life throws shade, you don't have to fight with fire. Sometimes, grace is the loudest answer. Irina learned her lesson the hardest way, that pride spoken in anger can echo longer than applause. And Ronaldo, he stood where he always had, watching, protecting, proud not of fame or fortune, but of the woman who turned humiliation into history. Because when the world tried to make her small, Georgina reminded everyone who she really was. Not just Ronaldo's partner, not just a face on a magazine cover, but a woman who faced cruelty and turned it into power. In the end, respect isn't won by shouting louder. It's earned by standing taller. And on that runway, in front of flashing lights and judging eyes, Georgina didn't just win the moment. She owned the story. This is Georgina Rodríguez. Graceful, fearless, unforgettable. And this is just the beginning.